Welcome, my friends, to another Common Communion with me. Jonathan Brandenburg gets to be a pastor over at Christ Lutheran Church and School in beautiful Ranchos Palos Verdes, California. And it was a good week, my friends. I don't know how your week is going. I hope it's going good, but it was a good week for us here at Christ Lutheran. We did our VBS, Vacation Bible School. It's always a strange name to me, but it's always a fun time. And so we had our VBS Sunday today. If you're listening to this on the day of the recording here, of course, I don't even know what day that is. It's like the 20th something of June. I don't know what it is. It's the 28th of June. And it was good. It was good. And so that's, if you're watching the video version of this, this one I'm wearing my Hawaiian shirt. It was God. I wore it all week and for VBS, and I got my my Aloha shaved ice hat that I got when I was in Hawaii last summer, I guess. So anyway, it's kind of just one of those days, my friends, feeling very laid back, feeling very sort of at peace with the world, and yet I wanted to make sure that I did Common Communion. I'm going to be on vacation actually for a while, so if I don't do Common Communion next week, I will be back the week after, but I'm going to try to keep it going because that's how much I love doing this. Even on vacation, I enjoy doing these things. So but we need to keep rolling with the book of Romans, because I think we're doing a good thing. I hope we're doing a good thing. Again, please comment if you don't like how we're doing this, or if you like to do it slightly differently. I like rolling through the book of the Bible sometimes, and Book of Romans is definitely a cool book to roll through. So we're rolling into chapter 7 of the book of Romans. So, and again, this isn't like super theologically or philosophically deep dive into Romans chapter 7 or the book of Romans. What I like to call this is devotionally walking through it, kind of seeing what Pastor Paul, also known as Apostle Paul or Saint Paul, is kind of writing about. Why is he writing about it? Why is he writing this specific kind of stuff to the churches, the earliest Christian churches in the city of Rome, sort of the center of the world in this day and age? Why is it happening? What's going on? And most importantly, how is it ministering, or what is it saying to us? What common ground can we find with that? What is happening there? So we're going to jump into the book of Romans, and I think the book of Romans chapter 7 chapter 7 today is really about the idea of realization, because up until this point there's been Paul's been setting up his own scene. Basically, Paul's been saying, well, this is the broken world, and this is why it's broken, and this is sort of the consequences of brokenness, and here's sort of and he sums all that up in a great word called shame, or I really sum it up in the great word called shame, and the shame cycles are all sorts of different ways of shame cycles and all this kind of stuff. Anyway, he's been going all this, but ever since chapter 5 and 6, we're basically setting up, well, this is the pathways out of the shame cycles. And the pathway out of the shame cycle is provided by grace. And that pathway out of the shame cycle is through faith. And yet at this point, what Paul does is very fascinating, because basically in chapter 7, he wants to double back a little bit. He wants to double back about a realization that may not have happened in chapters 1, 2, and 3 specifically. Because in chapters 1, 2, and 3, again, he really talks about this shame cycle of knowing that we're sinful, knowing that there's something wrong with us or with the world, and yet then wanting to suppress it, wanting to hide it away, wanting to tuck it away so it doesn't have to come under scrutiny. It doesn't have to come under judgment. It doesn't have to come, we don't even have to think about it. It's basically compartmentalization, right? And so we know there's something messed up about our world. We don't want to talk about it. And so we just perpetuate a cycle that allows us to say, well, there's something wrong with the world. We don't want to talk about it. Let's just keep going. And he just like, this is shame. This is just shame over and over and over again. It doesn't provide hope. It doesn't provide life. It doesn't provide really much of anything, except you build a whole life about compartmentalizing. So I don't have to think. I don't have to feel. I don't have to acknowledge the fallout of it. And so he comes back here in chapter 7 with almost this, and I'm going to say this, I don't know if it's really true, but I think it gets really close to the truth, if you will. It's almost a Hollywood-like realization of how bad the situation actually is. Because Paul has set all this up, especially in chapters 1, 2, and 3. Then specifically in 5 and 6, he set up a way out of it. But before we go really deep into the way out of it, he wants to really have a moment to say, you know, the problem isn't the actual realization of our sin. The problem, or our messed upness, our brokenness, the problem isn't the one that tells us that we're messed up. The problem is actually us. 100% us. And so I think there is this level of Paul trying to draw us in to a very personal moment of a more general moment that he was trying to provide in chapters 1, 2, and 3 of messed up world, messed up people. We don't want to talk about it, so we just do this shame cycle thing. And yet then he makes it very personal. And he has this personal testimony about it. Because Paul, and maybe it's important to know, maybe it's not, Paul was all about this thing called the law. And it's very important to him. It's very important to the Jewish people at the time, even the Jewish people today. This whole idea of Torah, the 10 Commandments, but then all the laws, the Levitical Code, it's all wrapped up in this word called the law. But it's basically, if you're a Mandalorian fan, this is the way, right? This is that kind of idea. It's like, this is how we do it. This is how we stay not only disciplined in life, but close to our divinity, to God. So if you follow this disciplined life, then you can like not only have a good life, but you can have a connection with a good God. But what Paul's actually saying here in chapter 7, he's giving us a testimony. He's kind of giving us a space of like, you know what? Here's the reality. The reality is it doesn't actually work that way. And this is the big aha moment. This is the big Hollywood realization moment, because he is absolutely convinced there are going to be people reading this letter of his, and people are going to be hearing his words, and are going to be saying, well, that's just for those that cannot. So chapters 1, 2, and 3, that's just for those that cannot live the life of discipline. And they'll be absolutely convinced that if you can't live the life of discipline, then yeah, you should rely on grace, you should go with faith. But if you could rely on discipline, if you could be disciplined in your life, if you could be focused in your life, then you would realize how much freedom there is in the life of discipline, how much freedom there is in a life of focus and drive and passion, whatever it is, right? And Paul is saying, no, that's not the truth. And he goes on about how this thing called the law, which is a perfect thing. So if you think of the best discipline that you've ever heard, like kind of like this whole idea of like, if you could just follow these steps and you could be disciplined enough to follow these steps, it would be amazing, right? And think of whatever you want to think of on this. I think of the movie The Last Samurai for some reason, this whole idea when Tom Cruise becomes like disciplined in his life and he finds this sort of minimalistic, simple way of living that's super disciplined. He finds freedom, right? Freedom from a lot of horrors that he's had to experience in his life. Or you could think about, other things that you might have felt. I even found this in the early church when I thought, yeah, grace was very present, but I also thought it was about discipline. It was about like doing these right things in these orders and in this ways. And in that was actually a lot of freedom. And there's a certain amount of truth to that, guys. And I will come back to it, I promise. But what the problem is, that the problem with this perfect law, this perfect 10 Commandments, this perfect guide of commandments and ordinances that God has given to the people of Israel, and now to all of us actually, is that the only end, and this is Paul in Romans 7, the only end to that discipline is realizing that we're undisciplined. The only end to that discipline, if you actually take that discipline to the logical extreme, and he said, take it, go all the way to the logical extreme. He says, here's what he's found with the law. And he was hardcore about the law, guys. He was hardcore disciplined. He says, if you really think you're disciplined, go all in. Be extremely honest with yourself. What do you get in your most disciplined moments? You simply get the realization of how undisciplined you really are. How much more there is to do. How much there is to improve. How much there is to think about. How much there is to remedy. How much there is to follow through. How much there is, and he's like, don't be dishonest. Don't take, like, I follow the law and so I made it here and I will take the good, but I'll ignore the bad. He's like, no, don't do that. Say, go all in. Be extremely honest with yourself. If you're this disciplined and the law tells you to be this disciplined, then be this disciplined. And if you're really honest, and he's kind of saying this from, again, a personal testimony point of view, he says, this is the good I wanted to do in my discipline, the absolute beauty and the goodness that I wanted to be fully about. Every time I went to the logical extreme of the discipline, all I had in the end of the day to show is that the good I didn't end up doing. Because the law doesn't care if you did 80% of the good that you were supposed to do. You didn't do 100%. You failed. It doesn't even care if you did 99% of the good you wanted to do that day. You didn't do that 1%, you fail. And discipline's not a bad thing. This is not me ragging on discipline. But what Paul is trying to say is that you cannot get to this. There's not a pathway out of the shame cycles through discipline. Discipline's a great thing on the back end. But if you're trying to escape a shame cycle, if you're trying to escape, brokenness in your world, no matter where it's coming from, my friends, he's like, discipline's not going to get you there. The law is not going to get you there. 10 awesome steps, the best steps, perfect steps, aren't going to be able to get you there. Because all it's going to show you at the end of the day is what you didn't do. It's not going to congratulate you on what you did do. It's not the point of the law. So you did what you were supposed to do. What do you want, a high five? It's only going to really be able to tell you what you didn't do. And he says, this is a beautiful thing. But he says this is a beautiful thing. And you're like, if you read Romans 7, guys, you just have this like almost, and I don't use this term lightly, my friends, bipolar experience or manic experience. It is a bit of a trip. You actually think Paul's is a very powerful testimony, but it's also like, Paul, are you okay? Do you need a hug? Because he's like, the good I wanted to do, I didn't want to do, but then the bad, I didn't want to have any part of. This is what ends up in my life. And I think this is what people's experiences are. If we were really honest with ourselves, we were vulnerable about these things. He's like, well, I had this thought, I had this goal, and then I didn't get there. Well, where did you get to? I'd rather not talk about that. Because maybe where you got to is okay, or maybe it was not okay. Maybe it was quietly horrific. I don't know, right? But what Paul's trying to say is we got to be honest with ourselves, and discipline, as good as it is, and he says the law is perfect, doesn't get better than that, it can't get us out of the shame cycle. And if we were really honest, like he was trying to be honest with us in chapter 7, if we're really honest with it, discipline has its place. Discipline can be good, but it cannot break shame cycles. It actually ultimately shows them, exposes them for what they really are. And I think that's why a lot of people who live a life of discipline either get into a shame cycle of religion, and sort of a legalistic shame cycle where they can create their own rules. They can create their own spaces where you have to be perfect and where you don't have to be perfect, because that's what they have to do. Or they go back to another, they eventually just cave because they're like, I can't live this. Every time I try to live this, I find more brokenness or more jagged edges about myself or more brokenness about the world, and it drives me insane. And that's why he says, thanks be to God for grace. And that's why I said a few weeks ago now, it's the pathway out of shame cycles, grace, realizing that grace has set a way forward. The way forward is called faith, and that's why it's grace, and then faith, and then it has to be grace again. Because grace is then going to keep us from trying to make the path of faith into something else. Grace is going to be there and to say, oh, you found faith, and then so you found discipline, and you went all in with that discipline, and you became a legalist, and you became a pietist or self-righteous. You just created a new shame cycle for you to follow, instead of following just this path of tension, this path of faith. And so that's why for him, and he's going to talk about this powerfully in chapter 8, my friends, like he's going to go hard in chapter 8 on the amazingness of grace. But he can't do that until he talks about chapter 7 more, and how this realization of how messed up we really are. Even when we have the perfect way out, we cannot get out. And I keep thinking about this sort of, and I keep on a Hollywood realization, because I keep thinking about all these, I'm kind of a rom-com fan, a romantic comedy fan, and all these moments when the main character, especially if you watch Hallmark movies, I don't know if you watch Hallmark movies, but I do, unfortunately I watch, but how there's always going to be this moment in a Hallmark or a rom-com when the main character is going to think they know what's happening in another person's life, and they're going to be so wrong, right? They're going to think they know, oh, this person did something horrible, and X, Y, and Z is the case. And it's going to be totally like a mistaken. They're going to be mistaken about it, totally. And it won't be until they realize that they're mistaken till they know how much they're going to fall in love. So I always like to say that, sort of this Hollywood realization, because until you realize that you're mistaken, it's hard to fall in love, at least according to Hallmark movies. But also kind of according to the book of Romans. Like, until you realize that, hey, there's no way out of this. As much as I want a different way out of this, I don't want to accept divine grace so many days. I don't. I want to do it myself. I want to be about it. I want to be a man, a human being on my own 2 feet, doing something. And yet, what Paul's trying to do is almost the exact opposite. Well, we tried. And there's this thing called the Old Testament. If you ever want to read it, it's all about men and women trying to do exactly that. And John, they failed. and then in chapter 7, it's his own testimony of how he failed. Like, the law was supposed to be this pathway out, this pathway of freedom, this pathway toward God, and it ended up being a nightmare. Because it just kept telling him what he was doing wrong over and over again, and telling him what he was doing right over and over again. Or how much he was loved, or how much he was accepted, whatever it was, it wasn't doing what he absolutely believed it should be doing. And I think, again, that moment where we just give up, that moment where we realize we're mistaken, or moment that we were like, you know what, I can't do this anymore, then it's easier to accept love. Easier to accept grace. You cannot fall in love when you know you're mistaken. And that's the message, I think, in Romans 7. Again, devotionally speaking. That God did give us a perfect law. But not so we could get out. But that we could realize how trapped we really were. how mistaken we really are. And from that moment, lean on His grace. Lean on God's love, God's hope, a faith that never puts us to shame and actually delivers us from shame cycles. It's my prayer for each and every one of us, my friends, that we hear again the good news. And it is good news that we can't do it. But thanks be to God, He can. And He has through Jesus Christ. We'll learn more about that next time on Romans chapter 8. Amen. All right, my friends, thank you so much for joining us here on the Common Communion. It's always good to be with y'all. So I hope you are having your good island vibes. I know I'm feeling the island vibes. It's like with the water behind me, I always get a little island vibes anyway, but especially this week, feeling the island vibes, with the VBS funness and everything. So hope you're feeling the chill, the more laid back summer month chill, and stay safe, stay sane out there, my friends, and just know that you are loved by God. And I'll see you, of course, next time here on The Common Communion. For now, my friends, bye, y'all.